Hey there, and welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today, we'll be chatting about contract cancellations and how to best go about them with clients, whether it's because your client wants to cancel or needs to cancel, or you're needing to cancel for some reason as the service provider. Obviously, this issue is a touchy subject because no one ever intends to enter into a contract to terminate it before all parties have completed their performance. Also, sometimes canceling can lead to bad taste in clients' mouths, yucky feelings all around, and bad reviews, which is worst case scenario. I hate to even bring it up. So we here at the Legal Page want to talk you through how to handle these situations from a legal perspective and also from a customer service perspective, so that in both ways, you can drastically reduce your risk of getting into more trouble later down the road with your clients due to contract cancellations. So let's get into this, Legal Pagers. You're listening to the Legal Page podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. As a reminder, before we get into this episode, I am legally obligated to give my disclaimer. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. All legal information I talk about in this episode is intended for the masses and a large variety of different businesses. Please seek out another attorney in your city and home state if you need specific legal advice related to your unique business. Okay, let's get back to it. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening in. During this podcast, we are going to walk you through how to cancel your contract and also how to deal with your clients canceling your contract. So first, I want to go over how to handle canceling your contract yourself as the service provider or the company offering services for an amount being paid by your clients. So cancellations can be very tricky in these particular instances if you're the one who is canceling the contract. And so you want to be really delicate about it. And here's the thing. You can cancel your contract at any time, but you really shouldn't unless it's absolutely necessary. So some of the reasons why you may want to cancel a contract are if it's like an emergency personal situation, if you have an extreme illness or injury that absolutely prevents you from completing services, if you have an extremely non-communicative client and you are unable to perform services anymore due to that non-communication, if you're closing down your business, or if there is a breach of contract by the client, such as non-payment. However, reasons why you should not cancel your contract are you don't like the client, you don't like their family or their friends, or some other reason you found out that you don't like about them, or you just changed your mind. Those are not really valid reasons to cancel your contract. And if you do, you are headed into some legal hot water if you cancel because of those. So let's walk through a few scenarios on what would happen in certain instances if you were to cancel. I want to dig into this a little bit deeper. So the Legal Page members have had situations pop up and they've inquired with me where their client suddenly stops responding to emails. If you're a wedding planner, that is obviously going to be a big issue since you need, say, the client's input throughout the duration of your time working together so that you can adequately plan for the event. And so what do you do if there's this complete breakdown of communication, absolute ghosting on behalf of the client? So before you cancel the contract, try to reach out to your client multiple times. That's the key here, not just once. You need to issue them warning after warning after warning and explain that if you cancel the contract, they will not receive their retainer back. If they don't communicate with you, they will not, you will not be moving forward. All work will be terminated and they will not receive anything back. These warnings, there's no number, there's no magical number I can give you, but I would say at least 3 is a good starting point. Kind of like first strike, second strike, I'm waiting. I would make sure that you have an adequate amount of time between the first notice and the second notice of that warning to terminate the contract due to them not communicating with you, probably a week in between then. And then if it's really problematic, you could issue that third warning quicker. But at least give your clients, it's all about reasonableness in terms of the law. So if this were to go to court, you would have to argue that you gave them a reasonable amount of time to respond to your warnings. I would say after 2 weeks and definitely after 4 weeks, you're looking at a good spot to be able to terminate your agreement because you offered them adequate time to respond and enough warnings to be able to respond. And then you want to be professional in these situations. Obviously, be gentle about how you go about it, but also, use language whereby your clients know in big, bold letters. Use extreme email titles, I would say. Be gentle in the language in your email copy. But you want to get those people's attention that they have to respond to this or else. And that's going to be in subject lines of emails. However, if you cancel due to a lack of response from your client, be aware that you are in the right to keep your retainer. And in situations like this, it might be best to cancel because your clients are preventing you from fulfilling your obligations under the contract. And that's the type of language you want to use in your email communications to them. And in this instance, even though they haven't been communicating with you, please do still try to send them a cancellation agreement. That could be in your third warning. After this warning, I'm going to send a cancellation agreement. I will be deeming this contract terminated. And then you've got the 3 warnings as evidence and proof that you intended to get a hold of them at no avail. And then you can send the cancellation agreement. Obviously, if they've ghosted you and they're not communicating, they may not sign it. And that's okay. But they should be receiving an email from you requesting their signatures on the agreement and notifying them of the termination of the contract. Now, a cancellation contract is not necessary to terminate a contract in this scenario, but it's always handy to have on hand so that there is that paper trail. And I'm going to get into cancellation agreements a little bit more in this episode, so just stick with me here. So I want to talk about another scenario now, scenario number 2. So let's say you've had a sudden death in your immediate family, and now you cannot fulfill the duties in your contract. So first of all, that is understandable. You and your family are and should be number one. But some of the ways to handle this with your clients is by being open and honest with what happened. They do not need intimate details, but it's really a good idea to give them an overview of what has happened and why you cannot perform your services any further. Next, I want you to try and find a replacement. This actually might even be a contractual obligation for some of you, depending on how your contract language is written. Make sure that the replacement is also someone that you know who is reputable and can do a good job. Don't just pull a replacement out of thin air. Make sure your client approves of the replacement as well. And this is where I'm probably going to get some pushback because people are going to be like, but I should just be the one to designate who the replacement is. But that's not how it works legally speaking. The key here is that they chose you to contract with, and they didn't choose this random replacement to contract with. So there has to be a mutual agreement between the parties that they agree to that being a suitable replacement. Also, you need to assure your clients that you will continue to keep up on the back end of things if you are able. So say you're a photographer in the wedding industry and you are unable to somehow go to that wedding. Maybe you broke your leg, or it's even more severe where you're literally hospitalized and you cannot leave the hospital. So you're injured extremely severely. So in that situation, it would probably be best to find a replacement. Also, I bet that clients are going to be a little bit more at ease at finding a replacement in that type of situation, right? They're going to be more understanding from their perspective. But you might be able to do additional back-end things from your company's perspective. So this doesn't really go for all service providers, right? Like a DJ who has to find a suitable replacement. There's really nothing further for you to do on the back end side of things after the wedding is over. But for like photographers or videographers, that would probably include all of the post-processing and editing work. So you would be able to find the replacement, but then you can really calm and keep your clients at ease knowing that they still have your company's maybe editing style or tone so that they are still getting somewhat of the same services that they initially wanted from you. And then finally, if you unfortunately are the only one who can do the work and no replacement is possible, or you can't find a replacement, or your clients don't agree to the replacement, then you are canceling your services on your own volition. And legally, you have to put your clients in the same position that they were prior to contracting. Did you know that the legal page has a couple sales in our contract shop every single year? If you didn't, that's probably because you haven't been notified about it. And the good news is you can become a Legal Page insider today and be the first to know about all of our sales. All you need to do is go to thelegalpage, paige.com/TLP insider, all lowercase, to sign up. Again, that's thelegalpage.com/TLP insider, and you'll be the first to know when these sales happen. You can keep fees paid for any services that you have performed. So if, say, you were a photographer, you had to cancel before the wedding, but you've already performed, say, an engagement session, and that was a part of your entire package, then you could keep fees for that. I don't recommend it, though, from a legal perspective. I would suggest that you eat the cost of that and you return all deposits, fees, and retainers that the clients have paid you. Obviously, it's no one's fault if it's like an extreme illness or injury or like personal emergency, but you're honestly taking on that risk as the service provider. And I want you to have some type of emergency fund in order to refund clients in situations like this. That is the best legal advice I can give you, is to avoid hot legal water and trouble down the road, to put your clients in the exact same position they were prior to contracting, even if you have performed services. This is not to say that you can't try to keep them. I just don't recommend it. Finally, just apologize a lot. The customer service perspective here, create a good customer experience while you're canceling. Like, don't make this a huge deal. Don't make it more dramatic than it already is, honestly, from your client's perspective. Apologize, be human. Usually clients are extremely receptive to that. Okay, and scenario number 3, if your client breaches the contract, you are absolutely in the right to cancel and terminate the contract. One of the most common legal reasons to cancel a contract is when clients don't pay or there is an absolute material breach of the agreement. So say they miss their payment in their payment schedule and you've given them a warning or 2 or 3, remember the more warnings the better for evidence and proof purposes, then you are in the full right to cancel the contract and keep the retainer, and all money is already paid. And as said before, make sure you try to have them sign a cancellation agreement. If they're breaching, again, it's very similar to them not communicating. They may not sign it, and that's okay. But again, just make sure that they're receiving that email from you, requesting their signatures on the agreement, and notifying them of the termination of the contract. As I mentioned before, some of the reasons why you really shouldn't cancel your contract is because you just don't get along with your clients or their family members, or you see something on social media that you don't like about your clients. Sometimes you just don't click with everyone, but it's honestly your duty to decide before a client signs and figure out if you actually want to work with them. Do your due diligence prior to contracting with them to just make sure that they're going to be a good fit, that they are an ideal client for you. Sometimes it's better, honestly, to just fake it till you make it and push through to get the job done than to extremely rock the boat and try to cancel because you just don't like the client. It's really not a valid reason to cancel. And in those situations, you're literally headed towards a lawsuit. You're headed towards a demand letter from the client's attorney. It's just not a good situation to put yourself into. Now, the only exception to this is if you're being harassed by a client. If it gets to that level, then yeah, you don't like the client because they're harassing you and because there is some type of like verbal or physical or racial or religious abuse happening, so on and so forth. There's all kinds of different harassment and abuse that could occur. Then you absolutely have the right to cancel the contract. Just make sure as well here that you have some type of harassment clause in your contract in order to fall back on that in those type of situations. And the last thing I'll say here is there's always I can give you as an attorney like the best suggestions possible. And if you were a client coming to me, I would tell you all of these things surrounding your situation. If you're like just not gelling with your client and you just don't think it's a good fit and you just need to cancel. And I try to tell you many, many reasons why that's not a good idea. But if you're absolutely just done with the client and you can't work with them anymore due to their personality, and you are like, no, I absolutely have to cancel the contract, I cannot do this, then okay, I can't tell you like absolutely not to, even though I've tried multiple reasons why. You need to give them a full refund, including their entire retainer. And you need to try to have them sign a cancellation agreement. This is in particular because a cancellation agreement has a couple clauses in it that I'm going to talk about in a little bit that will save you, hopefully, from any type of like defamatory statements or reviews online. All in all, if you are the one on your own volition as the service provider canceling your contract to cover your bases, you should have a cancellation clause in your contract on behalf of you as the business canceling. In TLP contracts, this is called a cancellation of services by company clause. In other contracts, if you don't have a TLP template contract that you utilize in your business, it may be called just a cancellation clause or a termination clause or a derivation of some sort using those words, termination and cancellation. So just look for that in your contract. But this clause needs to explain from your perspective, if you were to cancel, the following steps. 1, you need to immediately give some type of notice to the clients if you intend to cancel, immediately when you know you need to cancel. You would attempt to find another competent professional to take your place with the mutual agreement of all parties involved. 3, if another competent professional is not available or your clients do not agree to transfer of obligations to said alternate professional, then you would issue a refund or credit based on a reasonably accurate percentage of services rendered. So again, this would save you where you could keep a little bit if you did render services. But again, I don't necessarily suggest that from a legal perspective as your first step. I would suggest if you can give a full refund. And then number 4, you need to excuse your clients of any further performance and or payment obligations under the agreement due to you having to cancel and terminate. Okay, let's move on to the second phase of cancellation, when the cancellation is because the clients want to cancel the contract. So something may come up with your clients where obviously they need to cancel the contract. It could be that your clients are breaking up before the wedding, or somebody is deployed on active military duty. It could be that someone gets COVID. It should never, never be just because they feel like canceling or no longer want or need your services. All in all, it has to be a valid and legit reason to cancel. Now, my only caveat here is if they just feel like canceling, then they can do it, but there's no way in God's green earth that they would ever be able to recover money just because they feel like canceling. I just want to go over what you do if it is a valid reason for canceling and how to do it appropriately to avoid future legal troubles. If it is just they feel like it, they need to absolutely conform to your cancellation procedures. So in your cancellation clause, you need to have like a notice provision that they need to cancel within X amount of days or they forfeit all payments in the retainer. And then we also recommend that you make your retainer non-refundable so that if there is a cancellation by the client, you at least get the retainer for your services performed already. Yes, here I want to say communication, planning, prepping, invoicing, admin work, all of that is work performed. Even if your clients don't think so and they can't comprehend that you actually haven't, say, photographed their wedding yet, you have done other work. And if you have documentation of all of that work, you're fine to keep the retainer or at least a very significant portion of the retainer for services already performed, especially if they just feel like canceling. In those situations, you should just be keeping the full retainer. And not only that, but there is clearly an opportunity cost for saving the date for them on your calendar, especially in the wedding and event industry world. Even honestly, in like the website design world, in graphic design world, calligraphy and invitation world. I mean, I'm thinking of a bunch of different industries here whereby you're blocking out even a date or a few like weeks on your calendar, whereby you're not taking other clients. And that's an opportunity cost for you if they end up deciding to cancel because you could have filled that date with somebody else or that time period with somebody else. Also, if they just feel like canceling or no longer want or need your services category, if you have done any work for the client above and beyond the retainer amount, they need to pay you for the work that you have done up to the point of cancellation. So for example, say you are a website designer and you're like 3/4 of the way through the project, the retainer that the client paid was probably only 50% or even less than 50% of the total amount due. So the client likely owes you another 25% of the total balance to compensate you for your work that you've already performed. And this type of language needs to be included in your contract under your cancellation and termination policies. Okay, now to my point of what do you do if it is a valid reason to cancel? First and foremost, you want to try to abide by your cancellation policies if at all possible. So usually there is that notice provision, like they need to cancel within 60 days or 30 days prior to you performing services or the event occurring. And if they don't, then they are liable for the remainder due. Also that their retainer is non-refundable, non-transferable. But if your clients are having a valid reason, and now they're giving you a massive headache and pushback on your cancellation policy, like you're just not a good person, they're injured, they're severely ill, like how dare you just like keep their money? Those type of situations, you could give your clients the option to reschedule or transfer fees paid to some other services that you could provide. But this would be like the last case scenario, and I would try to avoid it if at all possible. The reason that I suggest this is only if you foresee a horrible lawsuit or an extremely bad review coming down the line. So just be sure here to give your client a time limit of that reschedule, because if they're already giving you headache and massive pushback on your cancellation policy, maybe they do have a valid reason to cancel and you're like trying your best customer service wise to assist them. The people who are already giving you those orange flags or red flags of, man, they're just giving me pushback and like they signed this contract, they knew what they were agreeing to. You want to make sure you're giving them even more boundaries to play by in terms of your rescheduling of this situation. So give them a time limit of say 3 months or 6 months to reschedule to a mutually agreeable date. I wouldn't lengthen that out any further to say 12 months. I feel like your clients are just going to walk all over you at that point. And this, again, just gives your clients flexibility. I believe it will pay off in the end by not 1,000% upsetting the client in totality. But again, it's really dependent here on the facts surrounding the cancellation. If it is a truly valid reason to cancel and it was kind of extremely unforeseen at the time of contracting and it's not just because they wanted to, I would never offer this solution just because the clients feel like canceling. And it's only really if you are comfortable offering a reschedule or a transfer of fees paid. Oh, and one last thing. I would never suggest putting this type of language, though, for cancellation purposes, actually in your contract. Have a very concrete cancellation policy. If you cancel for any reason within X period of time, everything's, the retainer's non-refundable. If you cancel after that, then you are responsible for the total amount paid. That way, it's kind of this last resort negotiating tool that you can pull out of your pocket if a dispute really does start getting heated and does occur surrounding your cancellation policies. So this is like one of those, Paige taught me how to do this. I'm not going to put it in my template contract. My template contract is going to have very clear terms on what my cancellation policies are, but I know that I could go this route in order to avoid a lawsuit or an extremely bad review if I wanted to. Thank you so much for listening to the Legal Paige podcast. I am beyond grateful for you, which is why I want to give you a coffee or your favorite bevy on me. If you leave a 5-star rating and review for the Legal Paige podcast on iTunes, screenshot the review and send it to me on Instagram at the Legal Paige, Paige, I will Venmo you a bevy on me. So again, send a screenshot of the review to me on Instagram at the Legal Paige, and I will Venmo you a coffee, because what better gift than caffeine for every business owner? Next thing I wanted to touch on for cancellation purposes is if you know your clients are, say, in the military, it would probably be a good idea to add in some type of active military clause to your contract so that if they do get deployed, you're covered and they can have a complimentary reschedule. Cancellations are really not a good idea here for military clients, and especially to conform to laws surrounding active military people. You need to ensure that you are allowing flexibility under contracts. And then just to reiterate, even if your clients are canceling, whether it's for a valid reason or just because they feel like it and a not good reason, ultimately try not to fight with your clients for unpaid fees if they cancel and they're not willing to pay the fees. I always suggest sending the invoice for the unpaid fees pursuant to your contract language and they agreed to those terms. But if they're canceling for valid reasons, it's usually because of something big that's happening and often involves high emotions. So you really need to take this on a case-by-case basis. Would it be reasonable under those circumstances to ask for the final payment due? Or is that why you're keeping a non-refundable retainer, to save yourself at least some amount of, the opportunity cost that you've lost, any fees that you've lost from trying to perform, your services on that date? If it is a valid reason, it may not be appropriate to send an invoice. If it's just because, absolutely send the invoice and try to get your clients to pay. I do doubt that clients are ever just going to pay for the remainder of their services. But one, it's always worth a try. And two, then you're upholding the language in your contract. And three, then you can really terminate with them and negotiate with them to sign a cancellation agreement by saying, well, I sent the invoice, you haven't paid it. I guess I'll waive this payment if you sign this cancellation agreement. Also, I forgot to say this. If your client cancels at the last minute and they don't pay their last payment, I want you to gently remind them of their obligations under the contract and then firmly remind them of their obligations under the contract. And if they're still resisting payment, not only keep the retainer, but also as someone who wants you to be empowered to uphold the terms of your contract, if they're canceling at the last minute, there is no way you can mitigate damages. And if they're not paying, if they're canceling last minute, if there's no valid reason, like you absolutely have the right to take them to court for the last payment or take them to collections for the last payment. Now, the last thing I want you to do, and this is a big one here, is no matter if you're the one canceling or your clients are canceling and whether it's a valid reason or not, you always want to make sure you try to get your clients to sign a cancellation agreement. I do not believe an email is sufficient. It's a good starting point, but I want you to try to get them to sign terms related to how you guys are deciding to cancel and terminate the contract. Also, a cancellation agreement always supersedes any written or oral agreements between you and the client, and it releases you of any further obligations to your client from the company's perspective. So this contract gives you options to allow you to either keep fees paid, partially refund fees paid, or refund all fees paid. There's multiple options here under this type of contract, depending on how you are wanting to cancel. A cancellation contract also needs to include these two big things: a waiver of claims and a confidentiality clause. A waiver of claims, that's why I want you to try to get your clients to sign a cancellation agreement, means that you and all parties involved are agreeing to cancel the contract pursuant to XYZ terms. You're going to either not refund them or refund them. And if you do decide to refund them a little bit, they should be, like giving you back a little bit more. And you should make sure that you're covering yourself from any future claims that your clients could have. So that's usually used in settlement agreements. And that's honestly what a cancellation agreement is it's just like an actual legally binding way to terminate an agreement. Of course, you can just try to terminate an agreement via email, but why not try to save yourself through getting your clients to sign a waiver of claims? And then a confidentiality clause is really important in this type of settlement cancellation agreement because it ensures that your clients do not come back later on with telling people about the termination between you. So this is where that case-by-case basis kind of comes up. You may terminate agreement one way with one client, but because the facts and situation is different with another client and you terminate later on, you don't want those two clients talking because maybe you give a partial refund to one and you don't give any refund to the other. That kind of thing needs to stay confidential pursuant to the way that you guys are deciding to settle and mutually agree on the termination procedures. As I've mentioned many times, we've had questions surrounding what occurs if a client doesn't sign it after you send it. So I want you to give those notice and warnings that X will occur if they don't sign it. And then send that final cancellation email. And if possible, maybe even a certified letter stating the terms of the cancellation due to, say, non-communication by the client or not finalizing the termination of the agreement. That way you have multiple legs of evidence and proof that you did try to indeed get them to sign the cancellation agreement and terminate the contract on good terms or somewhat good terms. Also, if they don't sign, then of course you don't refund them anything. That's a really solid negotiation tool that you have in your back pocket where you can say, well, if you do sign this, then I'm going to give you a little bit of a refund. If you don't get a refund. Usually clients are incentivized by money. I can promise you that. Also, yes, you do have to be prepared for yucky reviews and potentially false reviews if they aren't signing the contract. So you have to be aware of that. If you're just going to terminate via email because they haven't signed and you just need to move on, close the case, terminate the agreement, you just need to be ready to respond to bad reviews or have an attorney help you take down any false reviews because that is a situation that could occur, is likely to occur, and I want you to be emotionally and mentally prepared for it, as well as you have an action plan in place so that it emotionally does not get to you as much as it would if you didn't have an action plan in place. So I wanted to note that for cancellation contract purposes, the Legal Page has cancellation contracts that you can purchase to add to your legal toolkit. So we sell not just one cancellation contract, it's a bundle of cancellation contracts because you're going to need them for all purposes, right? You're going to need them for when you cancel as a service provider, and then you're going to need a cancellation agreement for when your clients cancel. And the language within those contracts is going to differ a little bit. So the bundle that we have is at thelegalpage.com. If you just type into the search bar cancellation contracts, it'll pop up for you. And you can utilize those if you do have a cancellation situation occurring with your business. So I hope I answered all of your questions and have helped you navigate cancellations. Please always feel free to reach out with any concerns or questions or additional quagmires you may have regarding this cancellation situation in our TLP community on Facebook. That's the best place to reach me at. I can't answer one-on-one legal questions in emails or in DMs due to legal ethics and responsibilities. So the TLP community on Facebook, if you just type in the Legal Page community into Facebook, the group will pop up. You have to answer a couple questions. We need to make sure you're a real business owner, and then you can get in there. We have over 6,000 people in the community. Lots of business owners are probably going to face similar situations or have experienced them in the past. They'll be able to give you their input and best suggestions. And my legal team and I pop in there. Because it is a group environment, we don't have any issues with attorney-client privilege or legal ethics and responsibilities attaching for one-on-one client questions because everyone can see your question and everyone can see our answers. So we are in there all the time to answer those questions for you as well. So just head over there, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you in the TLP community on Facebook, and I hope you listen again to next week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Page podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.